With the general election on the horizon, everyone is talking about polling. A whole load of news stories are focused on who's going up and down in the polls, and how significant the Conservatives' lead seems to be in this race. However, some do doubt the validity of this polling, and if you cast your mind back to the US election and Brexit in 2016, and May's polling results in 2017, it's easy to see why. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the ever controversial topic of polling. We're going to look at different pollsters, how they analyse data, if it's reliable, and why their results are so often contradictory. Before we start, I wanted to shout out our other social channels. We regularly update Twitter, Facebook and Instagram with extra content alongside our videos. In fact, rather appropriately, we often share polling data there too. So if you want some more from TLDR on top of this channel, then you can follow us elsewhere simply by searching for TLDR News. Pollsters clearly don't have an easy job. They ask a small section of the total population how they intend to vote, and from that they have to extrapolate how the whole country is feeling. This leads to all kinds of difficulties, but they tend to be focused around sampling, sample bias, and turnout. To begin with, any pollster needs a sample. Traditionally, the most popular form of sampling was called random digit dialing, or RDD. As the name suggests, a pollster would get a random selection of phone numbers, both mobile and landline, and go through the list. However, this has never been entirely reliable, in large part because women and older people are more likely to answer random phone calls, which would sway the sample. Lots of pollsters, like YouGov and Rasmussen, now use online panels for the majority of their polls, both because it's cheaper and arguably more representative. Once the pollster has their sample, there are two main factors which explain the differences between polling results. These are how different companies assess respondents' likelihood to vote, and how they weight according to past voting behaviour. So let's start with likelihood to vote. Let's imagine that you're a polling company, and you ask 100 people how they plan to vote in the upcoming general election. 60 say that they're going to vote Labour, but they also say that there's only about a 5 in 10 chance that they'll actually go out and vote. The other 40 people say that they're going to vote Conservative, but they claim that there's a 10 out of 10 chance that they're going to go out and vote. Based on this data, who should you put your money on in this election? Well, to answer this question, some polling companies like ICM, Survation and Comres do exactly what we suggested in the example. They ask you how likely you are on a scale of 1 to 10 to go out and vote. They then translate your score out of 10 into a percentage, and then weight your vote accordingly. So in the example mentioned, the predicted Labour votes will be calculated as 60 times by 0.5, or 30 votes. And using the same equation, the Conservative votes would be 40. However, Comres use a different technique, and if you put your likelihood of voting at less than 5 out of 10, you're excluded completely. And for ICM, if you didn't vote in the last election, your vote is weighted down by a further 50%. So if those Labour voters were all new, younger voters voting for the first time, ICM would actually only predict 15 Labour votes based on this sample. Ipsos Mori, another polling agency, ask a similar question, but only include the people who say that they're 10 out of 10 likely to vote in their sample, which means they predict 0 Labour voters and 40 Conservatives based on this sample. YouGov, the biggest online pollster, with some 50,000 weekly panelists, don't weight according to likelihood to vote at all. So that's why the different ways which pollsters use to evaluate likelihood to vote affect polling results. The second factor, which we mentioned earlier, that also contributes to the difference between polls, is how pollsters weight based on past voting behaviour. Often polls include a question which asks something like, how did you vote in the 2017 general election? With this data, they can see how well their sample matches with the population, allowing you to weight up and down voters to match the total population. For example, if you seem to have about twice as many 2017 Lib Dem voters in your sample than the population, you can weight their votes down by 50%. This seems like a logical solution to the problem, but the reason why this is so problematic is because of something known in the polling world as false recall. Basically, false recall is when respondents apparently misremember who they voted for last time round, and it's actually really common. For example, a fortnight after the 2017 election, YouGov asked a group how they voted, and these were their results. Pretty close to the actual national averages. YouGov asked the exact same people the same question 2 years later, and their results had surprisingly changed. So it seems that these people have forgotten how they actually voted in 2017, and mistakes like this could lead the pollsters to weight their results incorrectly. How to solve this problem is another thing that pollsters can't seem to agree on. YouGov try and use figures from the respondents given at the time of election, while others like Kantar use current figures, and then try to anticipate the level of false recall. But some, most notably Ipsos Mori, just ignore previous voting behaviour entirely. So that's some of the methodology behind polling, and that accounts for how last month, one pollster put the Tories 17 points ahead, and another put them just 4 points ahead. But sometimes it's not just that the polls are different, it seems like they're just wrong. And how can that be explained? Well, there are certain quirks in British polling, such as the shy Tory effect, which means that Labour typically performs better in polls. But the main issue is that we use a first-past-the-post system, which means that you're only ever voting for your constituency MP. National trends that show up in polls don't necessarily translate to constituency results. Pollsters' jobs are made even harder by tactical voting. Tactical voting is basically when you vote for a party you think might win in your constituency instead of who your actual preferred party is. This can drastically change how people vote. For example, in 2017, Survation asked the residents of Bath, a traditionally Lib Dem seat that was won by the Conservatives in 2015, if the general election was held tomorrow, which party would you vote for in your Bath constituency? And they got these results. The Conservatives got 32%, Labour 17%, Lib Dem 46%, and other parties 5%. Then they asked the follow-up question, imagine that at that next general election, the Conservatives, Labour and Lib Dems all have an equal chance of winning your Bath constituency. Which party would you vote for in this situation? And the results had changed, so that the Conservatives had 30% of the vote, Labour 36%, Lib Dem 30%, and other parties 4%. So if that polling's correct, the Lib Dems only won the seat back in 2017 because Labour voters thought that Labour stood no chance, and therefore voted Lib Dem tactically to try and block the Conservatives in what they saw as a two-horse race. If everyone had just voted according to their preferred party, it looks like the seat would have been won by Labour. However, a new polling technique known as multi-level regression and post-stratification polling, or MRP, promises to give pollsters a bit more chance when it comes to constituency outcomes. MRP gained prominence after a team at LSE used it to successfully predict some of 2017's shock results, including Kensington, which Labour won for the first time ever by only 20 votes. Anyway, MRP basically works by finding trends across large national samples. That's the multi-level regression part, and then applying those trends to more specific demographics within constituencies. That's the post-stratification bit. For example, YouGov will survey 50,000 people a week, and from that information, they'll find out trends about the public. They might find out that you're 60% more likely to vote Conservative if you own a house, 25% more likely to vote Lib Dem if you're married, 50% more likely to vote Labour if you're female, and so on. Obviously, all of these are made up, and the data is much more complicated than this. This is just so you can get the gist. Then they'll look at the census data for a specific constituency and use that to find out what percentage of the population is likely to vote for each party based on the demographic data, and try and come up with a constituency-specific prediction without ever polling that specific constituency. Even in YouGov's massive 50,000 person sample, that's only about 75 people per constituency. And that's not nearly enough data for a constituency-specific prediction, unless you're going to use MRP. To give you a sense of what sort of data pollsters use, Survation uses MRP, and according to them, their model incorporates sex, age, qualification interacted with age, marital status, housing tenure interacted with age, past general election vote shares, historic presence of minor parties, average levels of education across the geographic unit of interest, average earnings across the geographic unit of interest, change of earnings across the geographic unit of interest, and region and constituency random effects. Pollsters are hoping that they can use this technique to come up with slightly better predictions than before, but only time will tell how good their fancy mathematical models actually are. In the meantime, pollsters are tending to make the uncertainty of their results clearer through disclaimers, but there's no doubt that they're hoping for better predictions this time round. With some very shaky predictions over the last few years, the polling industry could really do with some accurate results. If you want to see more coverage from the UK's upcoming general election, be sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. You can also hit the bell icon if you want to be notified every time we release a video, and you can find more from us across all social networks simply by searching for TLDR News. And finally, if you want your name featured at the end of the videos, just like these people, then be sure to back us on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.